In terms of guys, and you alluded to it already, that you think that we need to pivot on in terms of the way that we frame our brains about these particular guys as fantasy assets. Who do you think that we need to have a mental check-in about at the quarterback position?
Listen, Patrick Mahomes is not a startable asset anymore. He's not. I posted something on X and I said, would you rather have Baker Mayfield or Patrick Mahomes? Like, would you make the trade? Everybody wanted Baker and everybody wanted Darnold over, but we could talk about Darnold over Patrick Mahomes because this is not a small sample size. This ain't 4 games. This is dating back to last year in the second half when he did next to nothing. I don't know what happened. I can't explain it. They still win games, so Andy Reid's not going to change it. Patrick Mahomes is not a good fantasy quarterback anymore. Like I had him ranked ninth last week. It's probably the lowest I've had him ranked ever, and I'm pushing his ass out of the top 10 this week. And there's 4 teams on a bye because he's not a good fantasy quarterback anymore. He's not. Listen, they keep winning games, but he's not a good fantasy quarterback. And Mark Andrews is another one. Mark Andrews has had no points in 2 straight weeks. His snaps are way down. He's barely getting it. He's had 1 target in the last 2 games in each of the last 2. That's it. I'm not saying you cut Mark Andrews, but you can't play him. He's giving you 0. So there are players like this. You know, another example is Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's a big name. Keenan Allen stinks this year. I don't know if he's not 100%. He's got way more competition for targets. He's got a rookie quarterback who's not really that good yet under center. How do you play Keenan Allen anymore? Like we have to get away from like, oh, it's Keenan Allen, it's Patrick Mahomes. It's 4 weeks. It's a quarter of the season with these guys not doing anything. And if you're gonna like continually wait and wait and wait for that big game to come and keep playing these guys, you're gonna keep losing. We have to unlearn what we have learned, as Yoda once greatly said in Empire Strikes Back. You can't stick with these guys anymore. I don't care if Tucker Kraft is your tight end, you may have to play him over Mark Andrews into the
Well,
foreseeable future.
I mean, Tucker Kraft, who was tight end 1 this week, so
He had
yeah,
one good game though, but it's that one good game. That's it.
right.
It's better than Andrews. And right now, your top 5 quarterbacks. Have you looked at the top 5 quarterbacks? And my voice is going up right now because it's so crazy. Have you seen the top 5 quarterbacks right now? Jaden Daniels, by the way, who is my breakout quarterback of the year. Lamar, not surprised. Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, not surprised. Sam Darnold, Justin Fields. That's your top 6 quarterbacks right now. And Justin Fields wasn't even getting drafted. Justin Fields isn't even owned in 50% of some leagues
That's
on certain
crazy.
platforms.
That's crazy.
And you better pick him up this week because he's got the Cowboys and we got no Micah and we got no DeMarcus Lawrence and we can't stop the run most of the time.
I quite legitimately do not understand how there would be 50% of leagues that don't own Justin Fields, where he is unowned. I don't understand it at all. I don't understand how somebody could like have an entire draft and have him go undrafted. You had to understand, we have to understand that Justin Fields brings, and we didn't know if he was a good quarterback. He's looking like a much better quarterback this year in Pittsburgh. That's a separate like NFL storyline, is his development, quarterback development in general, right? Like patience at the position. We're seeing patience pay off for a bunch of different quarterbacks around the league, or actually more specifically, I guess, the teams that brought them in for a second, third, whatever, bite at the apple. But Justin Fields, at the very least, you knew that if he saw the field in Pittsburgh, which when we were drafting, we didn't know if he was going to, you knew he could put up a big number. Like you knew that. So in every single draft, what we were screaming was, hey, in a late round, grab Justin Fields. Just put him on your bench, because if for some reason he actually sees the field more than any other quarterback out there that is a backup at this time, he's going to put up a 30-point total, or at least have that in his range of outcomes. And you can't say that from most backup quarterbacks. So there were 50% of the leagues, this is telling me, that just did it wrong. Justin Fields should have been rostered almost nearly across the board. Somebody should have drafted him knowing that if I'm drafting a guy like a Jared Goff, I should go put Justin Fields on my bench because he has the upside if he, in fact, sniffs the field. And in this case,
Here's
he has,
yeah,
and he's QB1 on the week with 31.9 points.
here's his ownership percentages. ESPN 33.9, Sleeper
What's
41, Yahoo
happening?
31. I have been putting these guys in the waiver wire column for weeks.
But
Wandale Robinson 27.1 on ESPN, 45 on Sleeper, and 26 on Yahoo.
But I get, so at least I understand Wandale Robinson, because people have had, and I think you're right. Obviously, Wandale Robinson is somebody that needs to be owned now. You need to go roster him, pick him up on the waiver wire if he's available. But at least I understand it, because people are like, yeah, Wandale Robinson, this has got to be a fluke. We've had Wandell Robinson before. Wandell Robinson has never become a big high end fantasy asset for us. The offense we don't believe in, the quarterback we don't believe in. I at least can wrap my brain around why somebody wouldn't have fallen for Wandell Robinson so far this season, why they might think that a couple of weeks here or there, that's a fluke. But with Justin Fields, even if he's not good, he can still put up a good fantasy total for us. We know that. We know that about him. That is the thing about him in fantasy. So I don't understand the rostership numbers with regards to Justin Fields. So if you're in a league where he's available, I mean, good luck getting him this week because everyone's going to go try and get him, right? With this 31-point performance, like now you're not getting ahead of anything. And so
Right.
whatever, but that's the lesson learned, I suppose, for future, right? If you have a guy who has that type of rushing upside attached to him as a quarterback, and he is for whatever reason going undrafted because he's a backup or whatever, draft that guy. Draft that guy, prioritize drafting that guy in a late round and or in the first couple of weeks, picking him up, putting him on waivers or off of waivers and just stashing him on your bench. Because if it hits high. And you can't say that for that many guys around the league. It does boggle my mind that we can say that about Sam Darnold at this point. You know me, I'm a huge Sam Darnold fan. I feel very, very proud that my patience has paid off this season, but I didn't see him being a fantasy asset as a quarterback. I thought he was a viable quarterback. I thought that the Vikings would be fine with him. Or at least I thought that that was possible. I did not see him putting up the fantasy production that he's been putting up this year. This is bonkers.
Do you feel confident playing him this week in a London game against the team that drafted him, which, by the way, is pretty damn good against quarterbacks, the Jets?
Okay, run me through some Jets numbers, what they've done against quarterbacks, just to refresh my brain, and then I will answer that question.
All right. Well, I've got to go back and take a look, but we know last week, or well, not last week, but yesterday, Bo Nix stinks. Like right now, he stinks. At one point in that game, he had -7 passing yards.
Right,
I mean, and they were still in the game. The
right.
Jets have allowed 8.6 points per game so far this year to quarterbacks. The quarterbacks that they have faced so
Mhm.
far this year. Now, again, one of them is Bo Nix, and I mean, listen, maybe the kid's going to end up being really good. I have no idea, but right now he's not a good quarterback. They gave up 11 to Levis, but Levis stinks.
Yeah.
They only gave up 10 to Purdy. I
Oh,
mean, and Purdy's a
that
good
one's
quarterback.
interesting.
And
Okay.
then they play the Patriots, who stink. So I mean, they've played a one good fantasy
Yeah.
quarterback and held them to
Mm-mm.
10 points.
Yeah, I don't none of that means anything to me. I would still play him. I mean, if you have a roster where Sam Darnold is somebody that you're thinking of playing him, I wouldn't sit him against the Jets based on everything that you just described. The only concerning one there is 10 to Purdy, but we also know and I'm sorry that my brain doesn't go back to that exact game to
They
remember
got killed.
exactly
They
who
got
they were.
killed.
But I'm just saying who were they missing? The Niners.
Who, the 49ers? No,
Yeah.
no, no. They were at full health that game except for McCaffrey. But they killed the Jets, and so they didn't have to throw the ball. Yeah.
Well, that actually is something that we do need to keep in mind, is that the Vikings might end up in that situation. They might end up with such a big lead against the Jets
Dude,
that
the
they might
Jets
not need to
suck.
throw the ball.
We talk about like the disappointing players in fantasy football. Now, Brees Hall overall has not been super disappointing, but man, that gap between him and Braylon Allen in terms of the touches and the snaps keeps shrinking. And Brees Hall was awful. Yeah. Now the whole Jets team sucked yesterday, and they should be
Yeah.
embarrassed and they should fire the entire coaching staff. But that was gross. Braylon Allen looked better than Brees Hall, but Brees Hall was awful in that game. Maybe Denver's defense is just that good. I don't know. I mean, like, think about it.
Yeah.
Denver went into Tampa Bay and beat the Buccaneers, who just slaughtered the Eagles and beat the Lions. And then they come to New York and they beat the Jets in the game that everyone thought they would lose because of Aaron Rodgers. And that's another thing. We're going to talk about another guy too. Garrett Wilson, after 4 weeks, has been a massive disappointment. Lindsay didn't like him, but you got to be even surprised that he's been this bad, Lindsay. He's averaging like 11 points a game.
Yeah, I know,
I
which
mean,
is kind of
that's
what he did
brutal.
last year. That was my whole preseason point, is that, you've established a floor. You've established a floor that's lower than anyone would like for somebody who's going in the first round, and we are projecting a totally different set of outcomes based on one tweak, and that is Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers, who hadn't played the year before and wasn't good the year before that. So yeah, no, I'm not shocked. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised, I suppose, that it has been as bad as it has been, But no, I'm not. I'm not shocked, which is why I said don't draft Garrett Wilson there, because we all know he's very good. And even in a year where he established how good he was, like we knew he was an elite talent last year, even though the environment was that bad. That's how good he is. But it doesn't translate in an offense that isn't productive. And their offense has established itself as one that does not check that box this year. Brees Hall, however, little bit surprising, like the lack of productivity. He averaged zero point 0.4 yards per carry yesterday. Fabs, at one point,
It
I was
was
looking at, I
horrible.
literally went through the play by play to try and, I mean, it was bad. His first 8 runs against Denver went for 1 yard, no gain, no gain, -2, -2, no gain, no gain, 3 yards. What? Like, what's happening? How? I mean, bad offensive environment, but like never breaking one, never being able to, I don't know. It's a little bit weird.
Hunter Lipke, who is the Cowboys fullback, he's got more points than Brees Hall this week.
Yikes.
It's insane. It's insane, and that'll also roll into like one of the points that I want to make in this show is that the number of must start fantasy players is dwindling.
Lots and lots of ways to play fantasy football. Do you guys know about Prize Picks? It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 projections, stat projections, and you watch the winnings come rolling in.
Yeah, that's right, Lindsay. And now you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And Prize Picks invented what's called the flex play, and that means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't absolutely perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit.
Jen Piacenti's lineups were perfect last weekend. She won a bunch of money on Prize Picks. We shared a screenshot of that on the social media channels that we have here, Fantasy Dirt Pod. So let's see, Saquon more than 22.5 receiving yards, that cashed. Baker more than 1.5 touchdowns. Godwin more than 65.5 receiving yards. How about Brian Thomas Jr.? She hit on that also, more than 47.5 receiving yards. Anyway, she's going to be here Wednesday and Friday and can point us in the right direction of a few of those types of player projections that you might want to get in on this week.
All right, folks. So make sure you download the Prize Picks app today, and you could use the code Fantasy Dirt and get $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's code Fantasy Dirt on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus, guys. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Obviously, guys, CD Lamb's a must start, Josh Allen's a must start, but now like Jaden Daniels is a must start, Patrick Mahomes is not. Mark Andrews is not a must start anymore. Garrett
No.
Wilson's not a must
God.
start anymore.
No.
Right. I mean, like
By the
like
way, I do
before.
I do feel smart because I did tell people to sit Garrett Wilson this week, which is a little bit out
Right, we
there.
talked
I
about it.
know part of that had to do, part of his number this week had to do with the defensive matchup and the fact that he's going up, yeah, against Surtain. Surtain
Mhm.
has established that he can shut down and or just make it so that you don't want to throw at the guy that he is
Yeah,
covering, and that was certainly the case for Garrett Wilson
but there are
yesterday.
players. There are players now that's like I always like start them and sit them. I say I'm only going to talk about the players who aren't obvious.
Mhm.
The number of obvious players is shrinking, and like it really is. Kelsey before yesterday had been bad this year.
Yeah.
Right? Sam Laporte has been bad. Ramondre Stevenson, like for the last 2 weeks, has been bad. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill been bad. They're not must starts anymore. Tyreek Hill's not a must start anymore. Until
Yeah.
Tua comes back, he's not.
Well, we'll
Like
see what
it's
happens
it's
tonight.
crazy. I know. I mean, I hope Huntley can do something and turn things around. But if you think about it, that whole adage is almost gone. There are players that you're starting every week. That number is dwindling down. Like Dak Prescott last year was a guy you were starting every single week. He's had one good game this year, and he's got the Steelers this week in Pittsburgh. Like he's not a must start. There's no must start defenses. And now Lindsay will say the Vikings, and I think I jinxed the Vikings yesterday because
I
the
know.
Vikings defense looked good.
I
And
know.
I said, well, Lindsay, I guess maybe I was wrong about there not being a must. Then the Vikings went to hell and they had a crappy game in fantasy. There's not a must start defense out there. It's brutal. And I mean, is Amari Cooper like a must start anymore? No,
Oh
he's not.
god,
I mean,
no. No.
geez Louise, that one ball that Watson threw right in his breadbasket, it bounced up into the air and the Raider defender caught it. Like his catch rate is terrible. He's not a must start anymore. And listen, don't cry any tears for me and Lindsay or any other fantasy analysts out there. We love doing this. It's a lot of fun. The numbers are the numbers, but it's getting increasingly more difficult to trust anybody
Yeah.
these days.
Well, I mean, just start with the Cardinals going up against the Commanders defense, and
I
all
know,
signs pointed to the
Kyler.
Commanders defense being just awful. And like,
Yeah.
please put in anybody who's playing the Commanders every single week on the offensive side of the ball. And then that didn't get there. They didn't get there.
Well, Connor had a good game. Harrison was okay because he had the touchdown. But Kyler, like we were talking about Kyler's had one good game this year. That's it. He couldn't get it done against Detroit. He couldn't get it done against Washington. He's had one big game. And so, like, I think he was my start of the week at quarterback. I'm like, damn. And people are like, that's easy, Fabiano. That's low hanging fruit. You're an idiot. Oh, yeah? I was wrong. He
Right.
sucked. So, like, I mean, like, it ain't no low hanging fruit, kids. It is what it is.
I think that my overarching thought after yesterday was all of the things that you said, but also that we just really need to be flexible because these environments are changing by the minute. And I almost think that the theme of the season is how much environment matters. And that starts at the quarterback position, and it has to do with Sam Darnold, and it has to do with like Andy Dalton stepping in and changing Carolina's offense, entirely. It has to do with even Joe Flacco. When we talked about Anthony Richardson, we haven't even talked about Anthony Richardson getting hurt, but Anthony Richardson, I told you all week last week, go ahead and grab Joe Flacco off the waiver wire. I didn't think that him going in and becoming a viable fantasy guy was going to happen in that manner, though obviously that should have also been something that we talked about, is that Anthony Richardson's style of play always makes him an injury risk, and so you should have that backed up anyway. But Joe Flacco coming in, they weren't throwing the ball downfield the way that Anthony Richardson does, but they were completing those short and easy passes. And so you see guys like Michael Pittman suddenly show up in the top 24 at wide receiver, a guy who had not been playable thus far. And so, I mean, I look at some of these wide receivers, and there were 13 wide receivers that finished in the top 24 that you might have considered not playing this week. And the reason that they hit in I mean, almost to a man, has to do with environmental changes, right? Dontavian Wicks, obviously, that's an injury situation. So all of a sudden, we're dealing with him as wide receiver 3. Josh Downs was wide receiver 8 on the week. Change in quarterbacks. We also saw Michael Pittman show up at wide receiver 19, 9 targets, 6 catches, 113 yards. We wouldn't have seen a stat line like that with
No, it's amazing. Like between Dalton and Flacco, like all of a sudden they came in and these guys, I don't know if they just had a fire lit under their butts or just it's better quarterback play.
Yeah, it's not a fire, it's better quarterback play. It's professional quarterback, it's this experience mattering, and there are so many examples of that around the league. A guy for whom the game has slowed down already, and you can get through your progressions and make the right reads and get the ball to the right person. And you could even make an argument. We had a really long conversation on the Sumer Sports Show last week that was kind of like nerdy and in the weeds about too high safety looks and the fact that we're seeing them at such a high rate defensively this year. The number going into this past week was like 63% of the time we're seeing 2 high safeties defensively. That's a massive shift from what we saw in 2018 in terms of single high. Like it's flipped. That's how defenses are playing now. So what that means is that the defenses are taking they're making it impossible. They're taking the top off. And so now you're like short, they're flushing these passes to the flats. And so what you need now with defenses playing the way that they're playing are quarterbacks who can accurately take advantage of the space of the field that the defense is giving you. And some of these younger quarterbacks who just are inexperienced they have the traits, they have the tools, they've got these big arms, but they don't have experience processing and reading the defense and knowing exactly where the hole is. And so now enter Andy Dalton and Joe Flacco and Sam Darnold and even, Geno Smith with these years of experience. Now you've got these guys who can do that. And those are the guys that are having success. And so that's why you're seeing, an Xavier Leggett pop up. Like stepped into Thielen's shoes, might continue to wear them, looked pretty good, does need to hold on to all of the balls that come his way and not drop them. But like that, I think the fact that he is wide receiver 12 has a lot to do with the fact that Andy Dalton was his quarterback and not Bryce
Yeah, no
Young.
doubt. Because that wouldn't happen with Bryce Young. And there's like there part of me that like wants Richardson back, but there's also part of me who has Michael Pittman that like kind of doesn't because Michael Pittman had disappeared when Richardson was under center.
Mhm.
The same. I don't have any Deontay Johnson shares because I just wasn't into him because of Bryce Young. But I mean, if I've got Deontay Johnson, I don't want Bryce Young to sniff the field again, like for the Carolina Panthers, maybe ever,
Absolutely.
because of the change in terms of the offense is going from one of the league's worst to suddenly I wouldn't say prolific, but pretty productive. Joe Flacco is going to be a hot name on the waiver wire this week. They got the Jaguars coming up next. Jaguars defense stinks against quarterbacks. So like Joe Flacco is legit. Like I will tell you this: if Joe Flacco starts this week for the Colts, you can make an argument that he's a better play than Patrick Mahomes, who's playing against the Saints, who have been really tough on quarterbacks this year. Honestly,
Yeah.
like, and that's part of what I'm talking about. Like Joe Flacco, on what planet is Joe Flacco a better fantasy quarterback than Patrick Mahomes? Apparently, this planet.
Yeah, I will say about the Jaguars, though, we needed that late touchdown from CJ Stroud to get him to a number that we were really excited about from a fantasy standpoint, because that was another one where we were like, I mean, obviously Nico got there easily, but the rest of the offensive pieces for the Texans felt a little bit like they weren't hitting to the rate that we expected that they would against this Jaguars defense. And as somebody who started CJ Stroud in one and done, was watching that very closely and desperately needed that late touchdown from him. Otherwise, he was going to put up a number in the teens, and that wasn't going to satisfy anybody in that matchup. So that might be
Yep.
that might be a Houston conversation. Like, what's going on with Houston? Why aren't they quite hitting in the way that we expected them to hit this year? But it might be another example of like it's tough to look at these defenses and just go like the Commanders, the Jaguars, like you think this is a smash spot and then you're like, "Well, wait a minute, why didn't it smash?" So, I feel like they've given us a lot to think about this week, Fabs,
You
'cause
mentioned the Texans
mhm.
this upcoming week. Buffalo, Stephon Diggs revenge game. Oh, I can't wait. That's gonna be fun, man. That's gonna be a fun. That should be an absolute just scoreboard scorcher in Houston. I can't wait to watch that game.
That will be really, really fun for a ton of different reasons. I've got some fantasy questions about like guys that I don't know what to do with. Two specific running backs here. Chase
Mhm.
Brown had a big game, right? Had the same amount of carries as Zach Moss. They ran the ball a ton. It was against the Panthers. That's what they should have done. They both had 15 carries. He had 80 yards. He was more efficient, Chase Brown, 5.3 yards a carry. He had the two touchdowns, which is why he, from a fantasy standpoint, certainly popped more than Zach Moss and was near the top of
Mhm.
the running back list. But in terms of advanced metrics, he was first in yards per carry for running backs with 6.3. He was fifth in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. He was second in yards after contact per attempt, second in rushing EPA. Chase Brown, those numbers kind of point to the expectations that a lot of people had for Chase Brown in the preseason when they were drafting Chase Brown over Zach Moss. Do you think that he is a guy who like was this a one-off or do you think that these are important numbers for us to know moving forward?
Well, they both did well. Just Brown got a couple of goal line opportunities where we were kind of hoping it would be Moss, but Moss still had a big game,
Mhm.
and I think part of it is game script. The Panthers are garbage against running backs, so you're going to want to start every running back or most running backs against Carolina. Also, keep in mind that like they've got Baltimore coming up next. I don't want to start Chase Brown against the Ravens. The Ravens defense, they're giving up 2.7 yards per rush.
Yeah.
I mean, that's brutal. So, like, if you started Chase Brown because he had the Panthers, great play. I am still backing Zach Moss as the better of the two from a fantasy perspective. But you've got buys coming up. So, Chase Brown may end up, somebody may chase the points. And the matchup says that Chase Brown should not be in lineups in week 5, but some people may not have a choice.
What about Najee? What do we do with Najee?
Yeah, I know. What the hell is going like I mean, we thought the matchup was really good. And
Yeah.
actually Cordero Patterson before he got hurt looked better than Najee Harris. Najee Harris's yards per carry was just awful in that game. And now he's got the Cowboys, right? And the Cowboys have no Micah, they have no, Demarcus Lawrence. They have one of the worst run defenses in the league. And if Jalen Warren can't play, then as an analyst, you still are like Najee Harris is going to be in play. And he's not the same back he was as a rookie. Obviously it was a different offense, completely different components in terms of the personnel in the offense. Unfortunately, he's never going to get back to that. I think part of whether or not he's going to be startable this week or not, and I think he probably is going to be startable because the Cowboys are bad and because there's a bye. But if Jalen Warren is out and Cordero Patterson's dinged, well, I mean, geez Louise. I mean, then you're hoping for volume. And that's what we were hoping for yesterday. And it just, the volume didn't turn into anything. And
But
Patterson was the better of the two backs.
we were hoping for volume, but we were also hoping that the matchup was good and that he'd be able to eat in that environment. And He
Well, they got
didn't, and
behind too,
it
right? I mean, like, they were behind in the game too, so, I was hoping to get, like, 20 carries out of Najee in that game, thinking Pittsburgh would, be ahead and winning the game and leaning on the run. It didn't happen. That's another situation where matchup is important, but game script could erase matchup in a second, and I think partially that was what was to blame with Najee. Also, I just don't know that Najee Harris is, that great of a running back anymore.
what do we do with him in general, like, in terms of tiers that we're thinking about? Is he a bench, maybe flex guy? Because so far what he's done is 8.9, 8.4, 13.6, 10.3. Like you mentioned, his yards per carry yesterday was atrocious. It was 1.5. He
Yeah,
was
yeah,
13
it was
for
brutal.
19 yesterday. He's
Mhm.
only averaged 4 yards a carry one time this year. Every other game, he's been under 4 yards a carry in terms of his average. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if it's the Arthur Smith. I don't know if it's Najee. Like, wherever Arthur Smith goes, we plug people in and we say this should happen here, and that's not what happens.
Yeah, but again, I mean, the only thing that's predictable about the NFL every year is its unpredictability, and that certainly has a domino effect when it comes to fantasy football. And so, Lindsay and I talked about this last week. Like, we are giving you the correct information. The Colts are bad against running backs. Najee Harris had all the volume potentially in the world without Jalen Warren, and so you put those two things together, and you think, yeah, he's going to be a decent RB2, and it didn't work out. Game script was not what we had thought. It was a negative game script. They didn't run the ball as much as we thought they would to hold on to a potential lead in the second half. I mean, even without Anthony Richardson, the Colts were able to get the job done. Stuff goes sideways, and it went sideways for Pittsburgh. And again, I just don't think Najee Harris is that good of a running back anymore. Now, Pittsburgh's done a lot to improve their offensive line. We've seen Jalen Warren go out there and put up some good numbers at times. But if Warren can't play this week and they're playing the Cowboys without two of their big defensive pieces, like Najee Harris is going to be a flex starter, maybe an RB2 because there's 4 teams on a bye. And does it suck? Yeah, but that's where we're at.
It was hard to watch the Rams yesterday. I felt really bad for Stafford. Like Stafford, felt like
Taking a beating, dude.
yes, 100% just running for his life, but also just like you know that he's a professional and so he's not, but it's the perfect example of like somebody who's just like, "Come on, guys, help me out. Like I need somebody to step up
It's
and
like
help me
Rodgers
out."
too. It's like Rodgers.
I mean,
Rodgers was pissed. Guys running the wrong routes. Alan Lazard getting that stupid taunting penalty, like just dumb stuff. If you're a Jets fan, I don't care about Aaron Rodgers. You know that stuff's going to go wrong. It's the Jets. It's the Jets. Come on, they're cursed.
well, with regards to the Rams, I just want to circle back and say if for whatever reason you picked up Tyler Johnson, you haven't been paying attention because he's been on your bench, you can go ahead and cut him.
Cut him.
Because that
Yes.
hasn't like, he doesn't even need to be taking up space. He lost his job, that's obvious. He had 1 target yesterday, 0 catches. Like,
Mhm.
it's apparent that Jordan Whittington has taken that job. So if you, need to make maybe a waiver wire move, that would be the
What
one
about
to
what about
add if he's
2-2?
available.
Do you like 2-2
Two
over
Why are you
Jordan?
saying it like that? Why are you saying, like, 2-2?
I think it's funny. 2-2.
Okay.
2-2. 2-2. 2-2. 2-2.
Maybe. I think Jordan Whittington is an interesting guy because he's young. Like Tutu has kind of been around. We sort of know who he is. Jordan at least has that. If I'm going to go with a guy who just steps into a role, I would almost more often than not, I would rather bet on the young guy. Maybe he's an untapped gem. Maybe he's a guy who emerges this year. I don't think that Tutu's going to do that, or he would have done it so far.
There's a lot of players that we could pick up off the waiver wire. Lindsay and I are going to talk about them tomorrow. But again, you can find the entire list right now up at Sports Illustrated. Speaking of wide receivers, and I talked about this a little bit earlier on in terms of like players that we just can't trust.
Hmm.
Brandon Ayuk. Oh my God. Like another stink bomb.
Another
He hasn't
one.
scored double digits. Like he's been awful. Like that's another guy. Is it time to bench him? At this point, because he's just not getting the job done at all, even after getting paid all that money. Like, I mean, honestly, like Debo didn't have a good game yesterday. It was his first game back. Jennings led them in receiving yards. Kittle had a good game. Jordan Mason smashed. Jordan Mason would have had an even bigger game if it wasn't for that holding call on Kittle
Jordan
when he
Mason.
broke that touchdown. Yeah, he's been awesome.
So
But
good.
Brandon Ayuk is another guy. I don't know if I could keep playing him. I just don't.
Right.
I mean, the good news is that they got the Cardinals coming up next. That's a good matchup.
How about this? How about we
Eh,
make an agreement? Because I know that this would be true for me. I don't know if I have I don't know. I don't know where I have Brandon Ayuk or if I do. But if I do, and I put him on my bench, if I decide, okay, that's it, I'm done, I will tweet that out and you guys can all play him. because that is inevitably when this happens, right? Like I told you about Dontavian Wicks, he was my big guy from the preseason, and I only in leagues where I had a bunch of flex spots, there were a couple where I was still plugging him in, like, okay, Lindsay, bet on it, it's gonna hit one of these days." And then this was the week I took him out everywhere. Like, no Dontavian Wicks. I was apparently wrong. And then all of a sudden, big bang up week.
Yep.
So
Yep.
maybe we just need to let people know if we're giving up so that they can hedge our bet.